In the history of aviation disasters, few are as heartbreaking or as baffling as Saudia Flight 163. On the evening of August 19, 1980, a Lockheed L-1011 TriStar successfully landed at Riyadh International Airport after declaring an in-flight fire emergency. The pilots had brought the aircraft down safely. Fire trucks stood ready. Rescue personnel waited to assist. And yet, despite this successful emergency landing, not a single person would survive. All 301 people aboard, 287 passengers and 14 crew members, would perish from smoke inhalation while the aircraft sat motionless on the ground. This is a story of how a survivable emergency became one of aviation's deadliest and most mysterious tragedies. A journey to Mecca. Saudia Flight 163 was a scheduled passenger flight departing from Quaid-e-Azam Airport in Karachi, Pakistan, bound for Kantara Airport in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, via Riyadh International Airport. It was the height of the Islamic pilgrimage season, and the aircraft was filled with faithful travelers making their way to Mecca for Hajj, one of the 5 pillars of Islam and a sacred duty for Muslims who are physically and financially able to make the journey. The aircraft involved in the accident was a Lockheed L-1011-200 TriStar, registered in Saudi Arabia. The aircraft was certified on 23 July 1979 and was delivered to Saudi nearly a month later. It had accumulated over 3,000 flight hours and approximately 1,700 cycles. This was a relatively new aircraft, just over a year old, equipped with 3 Rolls-Royce RB211-524 engines. In the cockpit sat 3 crew members: Captain Muhammad Ali Quaiter, age 38, First Officer Sami Abdullah Hasnain, age 26, and Flight Engineer Bradley Curtis, age 42. The captain had been a pilot for Saudia since 1965, though he had only recently transitioned to the L-1011, having just 388 hours on the type. Captain Quaiter was known in training as someone who required additional instruction and had difficulty upgrading to new aircraft types. First Officer Hasnain had obtained his TriStar rating just 11 days earlier. His history with the airline was troubled too. He had been removed from flight school at one point, but had mysteriously been reinstated by committee action. Some suspected nepotism or connections had played a role in his return. And Flight Engineer Curtis was an American, a former DC-3 pilot. According to the official accident report, Curtis may have been dyslexic, a condition that would prove tragically significant during the emergency. He had failed to qualify as a Boeing 747 and 737 pilot and had his employment terminated in May 1978. However, he appealed and requested to be considered as a flight engineer, offering to fund his own training. He was approved as a flight engineer on all routes in May 1980, just 3 months before the accident. Curtis had over 650 flying hours as a flight engineer, with 157 hours on the type. Of the flight's passengers, 82 boarded in Karachi, while the remaining 205 boarded in Riyadh. The majority of the passengers were Saudis and Pakistani religious pilgrims on their way to Mecca. In addition to the Saudis and Pakistanis, 32 religious pilgrims were from Iran. Many of these passengers were poor Pakistani and Saudi Bedouin pilgrims who had never flown before. Because they were traveling for religious pilgrimage, many had brought their own cooking equipment, butane stoves, and gas bottles that would have been illegal on an aircraft. These items were either smuggled aboard or security screening was insufficiently rigorous. The first leg, Karachi to Riyadh. Flight 163 departed Quaid-e-Azam International Airport in Karachi, Pakistan at 1832 Pakistan time, bound for Kantara Airport in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, with a scheduled intermediate stop at Riyadh Airport. The flight arrived in Riyadh at 1906 Saudi time and had a 2-hour layover for refueling. The first leg was uneventful. The aircraft landed safely in Riyadh, refueled, allowed some passengers to disembark, and boarded the remaining 205 passengers continuing to Jeddah. After the 2-hour stopover at 21:08 local time, Flight 163 departed for what should have been a routine 1-hour flight to Jeddah. At 21:08 local time, the Lockheed TriStar lifted off from Riyadh's runway and began its climb towards cruising altitude. Captain Quaiter was in good spirits, whistling and singing, a habit that would continue throughout the flight and would later puzzle investigators. Then, just 7 minutes into the flight at approximately 1914 local time, disaster struck. An oral warning sounded in the cockpit. One of the two fire alarms, designated as Alarm A and Alarm B, in the rear C3 cargo compartment had been activated, alerting Flight Engineer Curtis to the presence of smoke. 7 minutes after takeoff, an oral warning indicated smoke in the aft cargo compartment. According to the cockpit voice recorder transcript, Curtis initially said, "B aft cargo." His lack of specificity confused the other pilots. First Officer Hasnain broke his silence to ask, "What's going on?" Curtis then clarified, "Smoke detection, B aft cargo." The crew spent approximately 3 minutes trying to locate the proper emergency procedures. The difficulty stemmed from Saudia's organization of emergency procedures, which were split into emergency, abnormal, and additional sections. The crew believed the procedures were in the abnormal section when they were actually in the emergency section. Curtis's dyslexia likely compounded the problem, making it difficult for him to locate the correct checklist quickly. Flight Engineer Curtis went into the passenger cabin to investigate. In response to information received from flight attendants, the flight engineer went into the passenger cabin and reported back that there was fire and smoke emanating from the extreme aft area of the cabin, directly above the C3 cargo compartment. When he returned to the cockpit, his report was dire: smoke and fire in the cabin. The situation was critical. The fire had already burned through the protective panels in the cargo compartment ceiling, a catastrophic failure of the compartment's Class D designation, which was supposed to mean that any fire inside would self-extinguish due to the lack of oxygen. In reality, however, the materials used in the compartment's constructions proved insufficient to contain the blaze. The captain decided to return to Riyadh. At this point, there were approximately 24 minutes of flying time from landing back at Riyadh. Chaos in the cabin. While the flight crew worked to return the aircraft to Riyadh, a desperate battle was being waged in the passenger cabin. The flight attendants, led by Purser Fatima Francis, fought the fire with incredible bravery. They grabbed every available fire extinguisher and ran toward the flames, not away from them. At least 5 empty CO2 extinguishers and at least 1 water extinguisher were later found in the wreckage, along with possibly 2 more that were too damaged to determine if they had been discharged or not. The scenes in the cabin would have been chaotic and terrifying. Smoke filled the aft sections, passengers panicked, fighting in the aisles. The purser made repeated trips to the cockpit, providing updates and seeking guidance. The cabin crew made announcements in English, Arabic, and Urdu, trying to keep passengers calm. "Give me your attention, please. Be seated, ladies and gentlemen. We are about to land. There is no reason to panic." But the situation was deteriorating rapidly. About 11 minutes before landing, the thrust lever for the number 2 engine, the tail-mounted engine, became jammed. 4 minutes later, the crew shut down that engine. The fire was spreading, damaging aircraft systems. The purser returned to the cockpit multiple times. According to the cockpit voice recorder, she asked urgently, "Shall we evacuate?" The flight crew were focused on other tasks. She asked again. Flight Engineer Curtis replied, "When we are on the ground, yes." Captain Coiter responded, "No, after we have stopped the aircraft." She tried to confirm once more. "Do you want us to evacuate the passengers, Captain?" He told her to take her position, not answering her question directly. While still airborne, Curtis asked Captain Coiter, "Do you want us to evacuate passengers, Captain?" Coiter replied, "What?" Curtis repeated, "Do you want us to evacuate the passengers as soon as we stop?" Coiter did not reply. The purser instructed the cabin crew to demonstrate the brace position to passengers. She announced, "We are about to land, ladies and gentlemen. Place your hands behind your head for impact." The crew continued repeating the brace instructions as the aircraft descended. Then, in perhaps the most fateful moment of the flight, just 25 seconds before touchdown, Captain Coiter made a devastating decision. According to the cockpit voice recorder, he said, Tell them not to evacuate. 25 seconds later, the cockpit voice recorder cut out, likely damaged by heat and fire. The landing. 21 minutes after the first fire alarm sounded at 21:36 local time, Flight 163 touched down smoothly on Riyadh's runway. The landing itself was technically successful. The aircraft was on the ground and help was waiting. But what happened next defies explanation and haunts aviation safety experts to this day. The aircraft landed back at Riyadh some 20 minutes later and did not make an emergency stop, but instead taxied off the runway to a taxiway. Captain Coiter braked only gently, even though full braking power was available. The L-1011 rolled down the runway for 2 minutes and 40 seconds while fire engines were chasing behind it. Finally, near the end of the runway, the plane pulled off to the left into a taxiway and came to a complete stop. Emergency crews rushed toward the aircraft, ready to assist with evacuation. But to their shock and horror, they found that both wing-mounted engines were still running. The spinning turbines made it too dangerous to approach the aircraft or to open the doors. According to eyewitness accounts from the crash fire rescue team, the scene was surreal and almost nightmarish. One American CFR supervisor later recalled, "We got the alarm that one of the Saudia flights was in trouble and returned to the airport. When our crew arrived to assist the evacuation and rescue operations, we realized the plane had not stopped on the runway. Instead, it had continued to taxi for several minutes until coming to a halt at the taxiway. We ended up chasing the aircraft for about 3 minutes until it stopped." He continued, "When we got there, one of my crew screamed over the engines that he could see a fire in the aft section of the plane. I was stunned. There was no evacuation in progress and the engine was still running. As a result, we couldn't attempt a rescue. It was just too dangerous." These were finally shut down at 21:42 local time, 3 minutes and 15 seconds after the aircraft had come to a stop, when communication with the crew was lost. At that moment, all radio contact with the flight deck ceased. No explanation was ever given for why the engines continued running for 3 minutes after the aircraft stopped. Fire crews could see the flames through the rear windows on the left side of the aircraft. When fire suddenly burst to the top of the fuselage, they began spraying foam and water on the exterior, but they still could not approach the doors. Inside the aircraft, a scene of unimaginable horror was unfolding. Passengers, many already incapacitated by the smoke inhalation, crowded towards the forward exits, but the doors never opened. Either the flight attendants had been ordered not to open them, or they couldn't reach them through the crush of panicking passengers, or most likely, they had already been overcome by toxic fumes. The aircraft had remained pressurized during the landing roll because the cabin pressurizing system was left on standby. The pressurization hatches, which should have been opened completely on touchdown to depressurize the aircraft, were found almost completely closed. This kept the aircraft pressurized and made it impossible to open up the plug-type doors from the inside. The decision to close all cabin vents proved catastrophic. Instead of allowing toxic smoke to escape, the closed vents trapped deadly fumes inside the aircraft. The smoke contained a lethal mixture of carbon monoxide, nitrous oxide, hydrogen cyanide, ammonia, and other chemicals. One final transmission was received from the aircraft. "Affirmative, we are trying to evacuate now." And after that, silence. 23 minutes too late. 23 minutes after engine shutdown at 22:05, the R2 door, the second door on the right side, was opened up by ground personnel. When rescue workers finally gained access to the aircraft, they were met with an overwhelming wall of heat and a scene of inexplicable tragedy. According to the American CFR supervisor, about 3 minutes after the team finally popped open one of the doors, a flash fire ripped through and incinerated the plane's roof. "We abandoned efforts to extricate the passengers and crew. We were now hosing down the plane, trying to extinguish the blaze." He paused before describing what haunted him most. "When we opened the door, we first saw the bodies of the flight crew. The woman was so small, under a pile of bodies with passengers on top of them, up to the roof. They were all stacked like cordwood, like pieces of cordwood. All 301 passengers aboard were dead." Autopsies conducted on all non-Saudi nationals, including American flight engineer Curtis, revealed that all of them had died from smoke inhalation, not burns. This confirms that they had perished long before rescue workers could access the aircraft, most likely during the minutes of landing while the engines continued to run. The 3 flight crew members were found still in their seats. All victims were discovered in the forward half of the fuselage, evidence that the passengers had desperately tried to escape toward the front exits in their final moments. The investigation. The Saudi Arabian General Authority of Civil Aviation, with assistance from the US National Transportation Safety Board and Lockheed, conducted an extensive investigation into the disaster. Their findings revealed a cascade of failures: technical, procedural, and human. The investigation determined that the fire had originated in the aft C3 cargo compartment, though the exact ignition source could never be determined. Saudi officials found 2 butane stoves in the burnt-out remains of the aircraft and a used fire extinguisher near one of them. One theory suggested a passenger had used a butane stove to heat water for tea, but no evidence could definitively support this theory. The real question that haunted investigators was not what started the fire, but why the evacuation had never occurred. The investigation revealed multiple contributing factors: crew qualifications and training. All 3 flight deck crew members had documented performance issues. Captain Coiter was noted as a slow learner who required additional training. First Officer Hasnain had been removed from flight training but reinstated through unclear means. And Flight Engineer Curtis's dyslexia had been noted by Lockheed during training, and he had difficulty with routine drills. There were also crew resource management failures. Analysis of the cockpit voice recorder revealed significant communication breakdowns. The captain repeatedly ignored requests from the flight chief's purser to order an evacuation, a textbook example of power distance. In high hierarchy cultures, where subordinates find it difficult to question their superiors. The first officer, young and inexperienced, took little part in managing the emergency. There was also crucial time lost. Investigators calculated that if the pilots had brought the plane to a stop as quickly as possible and ordered an immediate evacuation, most likely everyone would have survived. Instead, the gentle braking, continued taxiing, delayed engine shutdown, and failure to order evacuation all contributed to the fatal outcome. Additionally, there were pressurization issues. The aircraft remained pressurized after landing because the pressurization system was on standby and the outflow valves were closed. This prevented the doors from being opened from the inside. And finally, the cargo compartment certification. The fire overpowered the C3 cargo compartment's protective panels, revealing that its Class C designation was inadequate. The compartment lacked fire suppression systems and was made of materials insufficient to contain a serious fire. Recommendations and changes. The tragedy of Saudia Flight 163 led to significant changes in aviation safety worldwide. The Saudi Presidency of Civil Aviation made 6 key recommendations, including avoiding the rehiring of flight crew members who had been previously dismissed due to substandard performance, a direct reference to Flight Engineer Curtis's situation. The US National Transportation Safety Board issued multiple recommendations, including the re-evaluating of Class C certification on L-1011's C3 cargo compartment. The NTSB also recommended either changing the classification to require detection and extinguishing equipment, or by changing the compartment's liner material to ensure containment of fires likely to occur in that space. Saudia Airlines revised its training and emergency procedures. The carrier implemented enhanced crew resource management training to address communication issues between flight deck and cabin crew. Lockheed additionally removed insulation from above the rear cargo area on all L-1011s and added glass laminate structural reinforcement. The NTSB also recommended that the aircraft use halomethane fire extinguishers instead of traditional handheld extinguishers, as they prove more effective against cabin fires. Perhaps most importantly, Flight 163 highlighted the critical need for better crew resource management. The concept that all crews, regardless of rank, must communicate effectively during emergencies. The purser's repeated, ignored requests for evacuation guidance became a case study in how hierarchy and power dynamics can prove fatal in aviation emergencies. The unanswered questions. Despite the thorough investigation, many questions remain unanswered. Why did Captain Coiter order the crew not to evacuate? Why did he taxi for nearly 3 minutes after landing instead of stopping immediately? Why did the engines continue running for over 3 minutes after the aircraft had stopped? Why were the pressurization vents closed? Why did the flight crew remain in their seats until the end? The cockpit voice recorder stopped functioning before landing, likely due to fire damage. So the exact conversations and decisions made in the final moments will never be known. Some investigators had speculated that Captain Coiter may have been in a state of shock or cognitive impairment. His behavior throughout the flight, the whistling, singing, and seeming detachment from the severity of the situation, suggested someone not fully processing the emergency. Others have pointed to the pressurization issue as a possible explanation. If the aircraft remained pressurized and the doors couldn't be opened, the crew may have believed they needed to depressurize first but were overcome by fumes before they could complete that action. Others have pointed to the pressurization issue as a possible explanation. If the aircraft remained pressurized and the doors could not be opened, the crew may have believed they needed to depressurize first but were overcome by fumes before they could complete that action. The truth likely lies in a combination of factors: inadequate training, poor crew coordination, cognitive impairment from stress or hypoxia, technical complication, and fatal delays that turned a survivable emergency into an unsurvivable tragedy. Legacy. At the time of the accident, Saudia Flight 163 was the second deadliest single aircraft accident in aviation history, surpassed only by Turkish Airlines Flight 981. It remains the deadliest aviation disaster in Saudi Arabia and the deadliest accident involving a Lockheed L-1011 TriStar. The wreckage of HT-AHK remained in a square perimeter to the right of the runway threshold at Riyadh Airport for several years, a stark reminder of the tragedy. The burned-out hulk was visible to arriving passengers, a ghostly monument to the 301 lives lost. The aircraft was eventually removed and scrapped sometime in the early 1990s. The 11 cabin crew members, particularly the Filipino flight attendants, are remembered for their extreme bravery. They fought fires until they ran out of extinguishers and made constant announcements to calm passengers, and sought guidance from the flight deck repeatedly. Their heroism in the face of certain death stands as a testament to the courage of cabin crew members worldwide. For the families of the 287 passengers, Pakistani pilgrims who could never reach Mecca, Saudi families who would never complete their journeys home, Iranian faithful whose pilgrimage ended in tragedy, their loss was incomprehensible. Many were poor, had saved for years to make the Hajj, and promised and perished within sight of safety. Today, Saudia Flight 163 serves as a crucial case study in aviation safety courses worldwide. It demonstrates that a successful landing does not guarantee survival, that communication failures can be as deadly as mechanical failures, and that every second counts in an emergency evacuation. The disaster underscores the critical importance of crew resource management, immediate action during emergencies, and the need for clear hierarchies that still allow subordinates to voice critical safety concerns. The tragedy reminds us that in aviation, as in life, there are often multiple opportunities to prevent disaster. The loss of 301 souls on that August night stands as a sorrowful testament to what can happen when those opportunities are missed, when communication breaks down, when protocols aren't followed, and when precious seconds are lost. Their memory demands that we never become complacent, that we always question, always train, and always remember that safety requires not just successful landings, but successful evacuations as well. Thank you so much for watching. If you guys would like to see more videos just like this, you can check out the video on screen right now, and I'll see you all in the next video.